April 30th, 1975. The air in Saigon is thick with humidity, fear, and the deafening thud of helicopter blades. On rooftops across the city, a desperate scramble is underway. This isn't just an evacuation. It's the chaotic, heart-wrenching end of a decades-long war. The images from that day are seared into our collective memory. People clinging to the skids of helicopters, hands outstretched, hoping for a miracle. This is the story of the fall of Saigon, told through the eyes of those who lived it. The final, frantic hours of the Vietnam War. To understand the chaos of April 1975, we need to rewind a bit. The Paris Peace Accords, signed in 1973, were supposed to bring peace. American combat troops withdrew, leaving the South Vietnamese army to defend its own nation. But the peace was fragile, a thin veil over a conflict that had never truly ended. For 2 years, an uneasy stalemate held. But by early 1975, the North Vietnamese army launched its final, decisive offensive. City after city in the South fell like dominoes. The advance was shockingly swift, catching both the South Vietnamese and their American allies off guard. By mid-April, the North Vietnamese forces were at the gates of Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. The final act was about to begin. Inside Saigon, a strange mix of denial and panic filled the streets. For weeks, the official word from both the American embassy and the South Vietnamese government was to remain calm, that a political solution was still possible. But the rumble of distant artillery and the ever-growing flood of refugees pouring into the city told a different story. The city's elite, government officials, and those who had worked closely with the Americans knew what was coming. They desperately tried to secure a way out, flooding the U.S. Embassy, paying exorbitant bribes for exit papers, and seeking any possible escape route. For ordinary Saigonese, confusion reigned. Life had to go on. Markets were still open, people went to work, but an undercurrent of dread was palpable. The city was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The official American evacuation plan was codenamed Operation Frequent Wind. It was designed to be a phased, orderly evacuation of American personnel and at-risk Vietnamese. The signal to begin was the broadcast of the song White Christmas by Bing Crosby on American radio service. When that song played, it meant the final exit was on. On the morning of April 29th, the music filled the airwaves. The plan, however, quickly unraveled. The primary evacuation point, Tan Son Nhat Airbase, came under heavy rocket and artillery fire, making it impossible for large transport planes to land. The orderly evacuation by air was over before it truly began. With the airport unusable, the plan shifted to a desperate, last-ditch helicopter airlift. The designated landing zones were the U.S. Embassy compound and the Defense Attach Office. But word spread like wildfire, and soon, any building with a flat roof became a potential beacon of hope. This is where those iconic, haunting images come from. One of the most famous photographs, often mistaken for the U.S. Embassy, was actually an apartment building at 22G Long Street, used by the CIA. A pilot bravely landed his Huey helicopter on the small rooftop elevator shaft, as a line of people climbed a rickety ladder towards their only chance of escape. Each helicopter could only take a handful of people. Every takeoff left dozens, sometimes hundreds, behind, their faces etched with despair as they watched their last hope disappear into the sky. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an American soldier or diplomat during those final hours. For many, it was a gut-wrenching experience. They were ordered to evacuate, but they had to leave behind Vietnamese colleagues, friends, and allies they had worked with for years. They knew that these people and their families faced imprisonment, re-education camps, or worse under the new regime. Marines at the embassy faced the harrowing task of controlling a massive, desperate crowd pressing against the gates. They had to make impossible choices, deciding who could enter and who must be left behind. Inside the compound, sensitive documents were being destroyed in makeshift incinerators, filling the air with ash and the smell of burning paper. The physical evidence of a American presence turning to dust. The sounds of shredders, sledgehammers, breaking equipment, and the constant chop of rotors created a symphony of chaos. For the South Vietnamese civilians, It was a moment of absolute terror and betrayal. Imagine being a government official or a soldier who had fought alongside the Americans, trusting their promises of support. Now, you're standing outside the embassy walls, waving your identity papers, pleading with the very people you called allies as they pull away. The promises had evaporated. Families were torn apart in the chaos. A husband might make it onto a helicopter while his wife and children were lost in the crush of the crowd. The desperation was so immense that people offered all their life savings, gold and jewels, just for a single seat. When the last helicopter finally lifted off from the embassy roof, it symbolized the end of not just a war, but of an entire country and a way of life. The Republic of Vietnam ceased to exist. On the morning of April 30th, 1975, the final American helicopter, call sign Lady Ace-09, lifted off from the roof of the U.S. Embassy. Left behind were hundreds of Vietnamese still inside the compound and thousands more in the streets outside. A few hours later, North Vietnamese tanks crashed through the gates of the presidential palace. The South Vietnamese president announced an unconditional surrender. The war was over. Saigon was immediately renamed Ho Chi Minh City. For some, it was a moment of liberation and national reunification. For millions of others, it marked the beginning of a new period of fear, repression, and hardship, leading to the mass exodus of the boat people in the years that followed. The fall of Saigon and the image of that last helicopter remain a powerful symbol. It represents a promise broken, the chaotic end to a deeply divisive war, and the human cost of political failure. It serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of conflict, the desperation of those caught in its wake, and the difficult moral choices that arise when a nation's involvement in another's affairs comes to such an abrupt and tragic end. The echoes of those helicopter blades still resonate today, a haunting lesson in history, politics, and humanity. Thank you so much for watching. The history of this period is complex and deeply personal for so many. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.